And we are live, so we're waiting on people to get settled in here.
This is not a healthy building, high-back-wise anyway.
Yeah.
It's meant as a single structure, and they've partitioned it.
Yeah. That's okay. There's nobody listening to me. We're complaining about our building. Why? Because we can. The air conditioner is programmed like at 78, and it needs to be a program like at least 72. I'd like it down to about 68. I could go lower. Yeah. So we're going to be in Romans chapter 9 again. And I think we left off right around verse 14. We're trying to get through Romans so I can start a new study. I never intended to make this a long study. I was just going to do chapter 8, but Romans is such a great book. I should have started at the very first.
So what you said is no injustice?
Yeah, no injustice. So anyway, so glad to have everybody here. And we're talking about Paul's writing to the church. And he's talking now about the Jewish people, the Israelites, Israel's rejection of God and what God offered them, mainly the Messiah. And he's not making a blanket policy that no Israelite can be saved. He's saying that the nation of Israel has rejected God. So we'll get into that. I really wish we had more time to go through this whole chapter at one time. It'd make a lot more sense and be easier to follow instead of breaking it up. But we have church at 4 o'clock, and I got to get ready before that. And so I get 30 minutes of this. Now, I can teach a lot in 30 minutes, but that's if I don't talk a lot. So anyway.
You wouldn't be the least bit confused.
Yeah, not at all. Not at all. So anyway, let's look at verse 14 through. I'm hoping to get through the end of this. We talked about how Israel had rejected Christ and God's purpose for them. And we're going to continue on that. We talked about their election and how Israel is God's earthly people. We're his heavenly people. So keep that in mind. And we had a couple of questions last week, but they were jumping ahead. And we're going to get to that hopefully in the next couple of weeks and clarify all this. Because remember, when we're studying the Bible, this isn't meant to be broken up in chapters and verses. These were letters that were written to people that were meant to be read all at one time. And unfortunately, now we read our Bible as if it was written chapter verse style, and it wasn't. That chapters and verses were added so that we could find where we were. There's 66 books in the Bible and some 40 something different authors, and if we just threw it all together and didn't have chapters and verses, we wouldn't ever find anything as we were talking. So when we're taking these breaks, I'm trying to break them as on as good a point as I can. So, okay. Everybody ready?
Will we be, because of that special thing next week?
Oh, crud.
Sorry.
That's a good question. I don't remember what time. Do you remember what time Christmas in July starts? 4 to 6.
Is what is on the thing.
So yes, we can do our Bible study. We got Christmas in July next week, and I don't stay well informed. It's probably nobody else's fault but mine. But all right, verse 14, chapter 9. Everybody there?
No. Got it.
All right, and if I start going, it's because somebody brought in chocolate chip muffins, and they know I can't resist them. There we go. Okay, well, this is Paul writing, and he says, "What shall I say then? Is there unrighteousness with God? Certainly not." Okay, the Paul can be very facetious. He could be very sarcastic and snarky, and you can pick up a couple other words to describe his way of talking to people. But remember, he's trying to explain to a nation that rejected God, why God didn't reject them, but has kind of said, all right, because you rejected me, I'm just going to put you on hold for a little bit. And they were trying to tell Paul, because remember the early church was made up of predominantly Jews. Paul is the apostle to the Gentiles, but he was a Pharisee, he was a Jew, he was converted. He didn't even believe in the church. He was persecuting the church, and now he's trying to win over his people, the Jewish people, for the cause of Christ, but they're just not getting it. And so he's arguing as to this wasn't God being mean to them, this was Israel being unfaithful to God. So that's where he's kind of said, you're saying God's unrighteous? No. It says, he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I'll have compassion on whomever I will have compassion. Have you ever thought, and I know I have, I from time to time, is how in the world could God save that person? I mean, I thought it was me. But, you know, I've heard people literally say that person's too far gone for God to save. And there's no such thing. And God can have compassion on whoever he wants. As a matter of fact, we know that it's because of his love for humanity that he let Jesus come to this earth and die on a cross. So verse 16 says, so then it's not of him who wills nor of him who runs, but of God who shows mercy. For the scripture says to the Pharaoh, for this purpose I have raised you up, that I may show my power in you, and my name may be declared on all the earth. And that's a kind of a cool statement here. And I hear this a lot from Christians. Why does that person who says they're an atheist or not a believer in God, why are they rich? Why do they have all this power? Why do they have so much stuff? And one, God never promised Christians that we'd have worldly stuff. That's just a myth, and it's bad teaching if you're following that God wants you to be rich and famous and powerful, because he may and he can. But if that was the case, Paul would have probably stayed a Pharisee instead of being an evangelist for Christ, if it was about money. But he was talking about Pharaoh was raised up for a purpose. And that was so that God could show his power and might to the whole world, not just to Israel. Because at the time when Israel was in captivity in Egypt, Egypt was the world power. At this time where Paul's writing this, Rome is the world power. But Egypt was the super power then, and God wanted the whole world, the civilized world, to know that he was who he is, God. And remember when Moses went to Pharaoh and he said, you know, my God sent me here, and he's like, yeah, right. You know, he tried to have his magicians come out and copy the signs that God gave Moses to do, and eventually he said, okay, I agree that your God is who he says he is. But that doesn't mean he converted. But God can use anybody for any purpose, and he will do that. And the reason Paul's saying this is because, remember, Israel is going, you know, God wouldn't reject us. We're his people. And Paul's saying, no, you rejected the Messiah, so God is going to go to you. So verse 18, therefore he has mercy on whom he wills, and on whom he wills, he hardens. You know, God will harden your heart. God can harden your heart. Now, it's hard to think that he would. It kind of goes counterproductive to the gospel, but you know, if you reject enough, he'll just say, okay. You know, you only get one chance. You're only required to have one chance to meet Jesus. God's merciful and long-suffering and more patient with us than we deserve. and he probably gives us more chances than we deserve. Look, when I was a teenager, oh my gosh, I said and did the stupidest things. I grew up knowing about God and hearing about God, but I made a statement one time and had a pretty convincing argument that I used with people that, if we are sons of God, then we'll grow up to be gods, because my sons grow up to be adults. And it was like, people were like, well, that's weird, man. But I mean, God should have smacked me down. He could have hardened my heart and said, you've heard from your Mima all those years, but God has mercy on who he wants. He hardens hearts on whoever he wants.
It's a very Mormon thing to say.
Yeah.
Grow up to be God.
Yeah. I mean, it is a normal thing. I thought I invented it though, because I am borderline genius. Just ask Dennis.
It's a big border.
Big border though, porous too.
Yes.
Most people today don't understand the bigness of God. God's too small.
Yeah, that's a great point too. Sadly, because of our finite minds, we can't fathom the infinite God that he is. How many times have you heard somebody say, well, the big man upstairs, or, God sits on his throne? Well, he does, but you know what? His throne's not in a corner or in a castle. He's the God over this universe. And this earth is a microscopic speck in the universe. I love there's a picture that I think it was Voyager took as it was heading out of our solar system, looking back, and it's this little bitty itty bitty dot called Earth, and it's like, wow, that's who we are in the universe, and the problem is they weren't even that spacecraft wasn't even out of our solar system, and Earth looked like a speck. Our solar system is one star out of billions and billions and billions in our galaxy, and we've seen through Hubble telescope and other telescopes that there are innumerable other galaxies out there with billions and billions and billions of stars, and so God exists outside of all that, and he created all of it. And so he's not this little guy sitting up on a throne. We think of the kings sitting in their castle, and nobody. All the people look in there and go, I know the king's in there. Well, no, the king is not in there. He's out there, man. Like, wow. I know. Yeah. But we don't realize how big God is. You're exactly right. I love that. Where was I? He will say, okay. Verse 19 says, he will say to me then, why does he still find fault? For who has resisted his will? But indeed, O man, who are you to reply against God? Will the thing formed say to him who formed it, why have you made me? Does the potter have power over, or does not the potter have power over the clay from the same lump to make one vessel for honor and another for dishonor? What if God wanted to show his wrath and to make his power known, endure with much long suffering the vessels of wrath prepared for destruction, and that he might make known to the riches of his glory on the vessels of mercy, which he has prepared beforehand for glory, even us who he called, not of the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles. And that was a long statement that he makes there. But remember, the Jews' argument was that for thousands of years, they were the only people of God on this earth. And if you wanted to get to God, you had to go through the Jewish faith. There was no other way. You couldn't become a Jew, but you could become a God-fearer, I think is the way that they called it. And you could worship the God of Israel, but you weren't respected as a Jew I believe that God has mercy on those who believed in him, even in the Old Testament, who were not Jews, because the whole Jewish faith points the picture of the Messiah looking forward to the cross. We look back to the cross, and Jesus said that no man comes to the Father but by him. And by that means no man, beginning to end, will ever get to heaven except going through Jesus by faith, looking to the cross as redemption.
Because I didn't understand that it was about faith.
It was about
Not
faith.
about
And he's getting ready to say that exact same thing in these next verses. And that's why we have to know what faith really is. Sadly, we think faith is just believing. And that just isn't it. One of my greatest challenges as a kid was learning to trust my dad enough to jump off a diving board into the deep end of the pool. And my dad taught me to swim, and man, I could get in that 3 foot into the pool. I could swim back and forth like a fish, never touch the bottom, just swim and swim and swim. My dad said, I want you to go out there and jump off the diving board in the deep end and swim. And I said, I can't do that. He said, I'll be right here. My dad was out there treading water, and he goes, come on, jump. And I had this panic, this sense of, this is the worst thing that could ever happen to me. And my dad said, I will not let you drown. I will not let you go under. You're going to be okay. Trust me. And my head said, I trust you. But true trust, true faith came when I jumped off the diving board. And I acted on that faith. And that's what God's looking for, is our action on faith. And that's what Israel did not have. They tried to earn their goodness through just going through the motions of sacrifices and going to the temple and saying, okay, I touched something that wasn't clean. What's my penance? And it was just a ceremonial, ritualistic, it became a religion, not a relationship with God. And so he goes back to and starts to quote Isaiah here in verse 25. Now, let's turn back to Hosea in the Old Testament. Mark your spot. Hold on. Let's go to Hosea. One of the wildest, craziest books in the Bible to me.
His wife was the prostitute.
Yes. Now, I've had a lot of arguments with people about the Bible through the years. And a lot of the arguments weren't about the Bible. It was about people's perception of what the Bible said, okay? And one of the questions that I ask people when they go, well, God would never allow me to do that, or God would never ask me to do that. And I said, well, do you think God would ever ask a pastor or a prophet of his to marry a prostitute? No. And then we go to Hosea. And we are told that, he said in verse 2, when the Lord began to speak by Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, go take yourself a wife of harlotry and children of harlotry, for the land has committed great harlotry by departing from the Lord. So he told his prophet to go marry a prostitute. And if you read through this, they have children together. And one of them's name was Lo Ruhamah. I hate these names. Lo Ruhamah, which means I no longer have mercy. Then there was Lo Ami, which is I am not your God. You are not my people. And then they had another one, and the name was, where's the name? I'm trying to read quickly.
First one was Jezreel.
Yes. Okay, I skipped what I was. Yeah, Jezreel was saying, I will take vengeance. And so basically, when this prophet would go outside and call his children, they heard this name and knew what it meant. It's kind of like Abram and Abraham. Abram was a father of many, and Abraham was the great father or father of multitudes. So when people go, hey, Abraham, how you doing? And they go, how many kids do you have? Well, none. You're 95 years old. You don't have any kids and you're father of multitudes? They didn't hear the word Abraham because we think Abraham just a name. They heard father of multitudes when they said Abraham. So these kids in the Jewish nation, when they were called out by their prophet, their dad, the people heard, you are not my people. I will no longer have mercy on you. I mean, it was quite a chastisement of the people.
Of the kids too.
And of the kids, yeah. So the great lesson of Hosea, and we're going to go back over to Romans 9 now, because he's getting ready to quote Hosea, and it's chapter 1, verse 10 that he's quoting. But Hosea was one of these people in the Old Testament that, if you read his story, it's a great one to remember, to say, well, God would never have me do that. Now look, I don't think God's going to have us go out and marry a prostitute. But who's to say that he wouldn't? But listen, I believe that my wife and I were meant to be. I believe it was a God thing. But when I met my wife, she was a Christian and I was not. I was a drug addict, an alcoholic. I was a wild child. And it's only because of her and God's patience that I learned about Jesus enough to, and it was a horrible situation. It wasn't that she, oh, let me tell you about Jesus. And I said, oh, I want to be like you. No, we were on the edge of divorce, and I was homeless, and I finally kept hearing the words of my grandma say, one day you're going to need Jesus. And I said, yep, I guess so. Through a very hard time, I came to know Jesus. So would God ever say, go marry a drug addict? I sure hope she heard God's voice, but it worked out. I mean, we're celebrating 44 years this month, so I think it worked. But we've got to be careful that we don't jump to conclusions. Look, God doesn't want us to be unequally yoked with unbelievers. And that means not only in marriage and in relationships, but also in our businesses. A lot of people jump into business with non-believers. And as believers, we're supposed to run our businesses based on godly principles. And that's hard to do with some unbelievers. So anyway, let's go back. We're at verse 25 of Romans chapter 9. There's a little rabbit that ran by and I chased it. Every now and then I do that. Squirrel. Woo. Okay, so he's quoting Hosea chapter 1, verse 10 here. It says, he says, I will call them my people who were not my people, and her beloved who was not beloved. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, that they shall be called sons of the living God. And so he's saying right here in Israel, some of y'all are going to be called not my people. And that was the warning that Hosea had to Israel way back then. And now it's coming to fulfillment in what Christ did on the cross. So just because you were Jew, if you rejected the Messiah, you were not my people. That was the message. Then he talks in verse 27 out of Isaiah. And listen, one of the great things that Paul does is he takes you back to the Old Testament to lay the foundation for Jesus. You know, there's in the world of biblical scholars, which I are one, well, at least I pretend to be. I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express one time. So anyway, you ever heard that commercial?
Yes.
Are you a doctor? No, but I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express. Are you a biblical scholar? No, but I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express. Anyway, I've heard people say that if you try to prove Christ through the New Testament, it would be like, well, I don't believe that my granddad was really a person. But I'm going to go back and I'm going to try to find proof after the fact that my granddad existed. So it'd be real easy to write about that and go, oh yeah, it was him. I'm going to prove my granddad was who he says he was after the fact. But before, imagine if we're 3 generations before our grandparents, 2 generations before our grandparents, and we're trying to prove our grandparents are coming and who they would be. That's what the Old Testament does for Jesus. Looks forward. And that's what Paul does. He takes the Jews back to their own beliefs, their own writings, to say, this is what Hosea said, this is what Isaiah said. So let's read a little bit from Isaiah, verse 27. That's out of Isaiah chapter 10, and it's verses 22 and 23 if you want to make a little note by that. It says, Isaiah also cries out concerning Israel. Though the number of children of Israel be as the sand of the sea, the remnant shall be saved. For he will finish the work and cut it short in righteousness, because the Lord will make short work upon the earth. And he continues in verse 29 out of Isaiah, which is from Isaiah chapter 1, verse... yeah, I think it's 9, but anyway, it says, unless the Lord of the Sabbath have left us a seed, we would become like Sodom, we would become like Gomorrah. And he's talking to the children of Israel, that if God didn't leave a seed, if he didn't have that, and this is the faith thing, if he did not give Israel a way to have faith and know the Messiah when he got here, then they would become like Sodom and Gomorrah. And guess what Israel was doing? And to this, right now, Israel is a very secular nation. Very secular. There's not a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, you would think there'd be a whole lot more practicing Jews in Israel than there are, but it's a very secular nation. Although it's the home of 3 major religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, it's a very secular nation.
And so are we at the moment.
Yeah, we're not far behind, unfortunately. But Israel at the time of the New Testament had become really whacked out. And listen, it didn't take them long after being set free from Egypt for them to get out and start partying and worshiping other gods. And I mean, remember when Moses was up on the mountain, they were partying, having an orgy and drunk fest and made a golden calf.
Yeah, it wasn't even 40 days.
Just 40 days out. Hey, party time. So they've been warned. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up this, and we're going to talk a little bit. Verse 30. What should we say then? That Gentiles who do not pursue righteousness have attained to righteousness, even the righteousness of faith. But Israel, pursuing the law of righteousness, has not attained the law of righteousness. Why? Because they did not seek it by faith. That lady down there said that. But, as it were, by the works of the law, for they stumbled at the stumbling stone, as it is written, behold, I lay in Zion a stumbling stone, the rock of offense, and whoever believes on him shall not be put to shame. So Israel had become to the point where they were just trying to go through the motions of what the law said. And when I say the law, don't get 10 commandments stuck in your head. Okay? 10 commandments were not the whole law. If you read Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, you'll see the law in great detail. It has to do with eating foods. It has to do with marriage. It has to do, there's a fly flying around here, I think. Nope.
637 some odd.
Yeah, there's, I mean, a lot of ordinances.
Which Christ didn't make. God made the 10. The Jews made all of them.
No, God gave them all.
37 as well.
God gave them all. Because
The Jews went well above and beyond that. They wrote thousands and
the
thousands.
Jews, what was happening is the Jews were beginning to go, well, it becomes something like this. The speed limit out here is 35. Okay? So that's what God said the speed limit should be. But we're going to protect you, so we're going to set it at 30. That way, if you speed on our laws, you don't break God's laws.
And I was going to be really righteous in my town.
Well,
I'm going to make it 25.
Well, but you see, that was what was happening. But God's laws don't need protection. When God said don't speak, and 35 is not in there, okay? I'm just trying to make it something understandable. They were trying to build in things around the law, and they were also making up stuff. I'm going to get him. They were making things up to make the religious leaders look better than everybody else. And so God's laws told Israel how to live to be righteous. Now, they were trying to just do the laws, but remember, all those laws were designed, one, to show us that we can't keep them all. That it's just impossible to keep all those laws. Also, they're pointing to everything, gosh, I don't know if I could teach it if I had to, how all those laws end up pointing to Christ. I just don't know if I could, because it's quite incredible. That was the purpose for all of it, to point to Christ. But the main things, the sacrificial laws, I mean, if you read in Malachi, in the last book of the Old Testament, God asked the question, how will you rob God? And it says, by your tithes and offerings, by not giving what God had told you to. It talks about bringing sacrifices of lame animals. If you remember when Jesus went into the temple and turned over all the tables and kicked people out, remember that story? The reason he did that was not because they were selling in the temple, okay? Listen, some of my friends out here who are really staunch legalistic Baptists, I was a pastor of a church like that. We would have gospel singings, and of course we had some groups that had cassettes and all, and they would bring in a table and set up for their cassettes and T-shirts so that you could buy their music, but they weren't allowed to bring it into the sanctuary. They could set it up in the vestibule outside the sanctuary, but you were not allowed to buy and sell in the sanctuary. Well, that is not so. There's nothing in the Bible that says that. Not one thing. Matter of fact, in the temple, it was perfectly okay to buy and sell. The problem was they were selling doves.
10 times the going rate or whatever.
Well, first of all, it's our responsibility. As a Jew, it was our responsibility to bring your own. However, if you were poor, you could bring it in from somebody, so it could be given to you in the temple. They could sell you one for very cheap. But what they were doing is they had temple money. Okay, temple money was only good in the temple. So the Jews would bring in the Roman money, which was the real money, and they'd say, I'm sorry, we don't accept that. Go over there and exchange, because remember they turned over the tables of the money changers. So they would say, here's my $20, and they would give you 20 temple dollars, which were absolutely worthless. And so then you would go and you would buy, but it wasn't a one-on-one exchange. It was like, okay, the dove over here is $40. So you're going to have to exchange $40 or $80 to get your 40 or whatever. But anyway, they were doing that, and they were ripping the people off. And that's why Jesus got mad. Not that they were selling in the temple, but they were ripping people off, and they were causing them to not do this by faith, but to just go through the motions. Oh, we're going to sacrifice. I guess I'm good. And look, anything that we do, I am a very staunch believer that going to church is an important part of your Christian life. But I also believe with all my heart that the church that we know is so far from a biblical church that I don't know that Jesus likes a lot of what we're doing. because there's nothing that says go to church Sunday for an hour. We were supposed to meet. Church was a living organism. It was a body, and it was supposed to represent Jesus, not serve those of us who know Jesus with a comfortable place to come in and sing 3 songs, hear a sermon, and then meet next week. It is a place of, this should be where we come in and celebrate what's happened through the week, where we come in and bring people that we've led to Christ. See, what the emphasis on most churches is bring your friends to church, bring your friends to church. Jesus never said go into all the world and invite people to church. He said go into all the world and preach the gospel. Somebody's moving furniture out there. And very few people do that. We think our job is to bring people to church and grow the church, the local building. And look, there's benefits to having a church with lots of people in it. But the idea isn't to grow a big congregation. It's to grow the body of Christ, which means we're discipling people to go out and reach people for Christ. We should all be doing everything we can to lead people to Jesus on a daily basis. Now, some of our lifestyles don't allow that. That's perfectly okay. But we make a big thing out of coming to a building on Sunday and, well, I never miss church. Well, good. You might miss heaven, because coming to church don't get you to heaven. Coming to Jesus does. And we need to be all about that. But the reason I'm saying that is the Jewish people were going to church. They were playing a religious game, going through the motions. And what Paul was writing about is, guys, it's about faith. It's not about doing what the law said and getting it all right. It was about doing it because we believe God had given those laws for our righteousness' sake, not so that we could look better than that person over there who doesn't keep the laws near as good as I do. And that's what they become.
Romans 10:4. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness.
Yep, and that's where we're going next week. That's where we're going next week, where he turns it around and says it's all about Jesus. So we're going to wrap this up now for online. Thank y'all for watching. We have church here at 4 at 742 North Anderson Road here in Rock Hill. I don't know why I can't remember that number. Right up there on the door, and I can't remember it. But we'd love to have you. We have a meal at 5 o'clock afterwards. Next week from 4 to 6, we're doing Christmas in July. So bring your kids. Come on out and hang out with us.